Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown of the 189th District in Monroe and Pike counties. Who would believe that having a growing community would be a curse? But that's proved to be the case for the Pocono region as it relates to state education funding. Because of an educational funding formula enacted in 1991, no school district can receive less state funding than the prior year. That means if a district has fewer students, they receive the same amount of money or more. This hold harmless clause has punished school districts in growing areas like ours. And after many years of broken promises, it seemed the time for action had come. At a recent press conference, I announced my intention, along with my House colleague, Representative Mario Scavello, to file a lawsuit to have Pennsylvania's 1991 funding formula ruled unconstitutional. If successful, the General Assembly would have to create a new, more fair formula. I'd like to share the press conference with you now.
Good morning. I would like to thank all of you for being here this morning as I detail our plan to file a lawsuit that my colleagues and I are preparing to file against the Commonwealth. For more than 20 years, fast-growing school districts across the Commonwealth have been penalized by the state's outdated funding formula. That is why in the near future my colleagues and I are here today to plan to file this lawsuit on grounds it violates the equal protection provision of the state constitution. It is important to note that my county, Monroe County Schools, aren't the only districts losing funding because an unfair hold harmless provision which allocates funding to schools based on a 1990 census. My county and many others across the state are near the bottom in per pupil aid statewide because of the hold harmless provision, which guarantees no district in the state will receive less state funding even if student population declines. That translates to less funding per pupil for the faster growing school districts. Slow growing areas across the Commonwealth benefited from the outdated school funding formula, leaving booming areas like Monroe County, Pike, Wayne, Berks, Northampton, Carbon, York, as well as other growing areas desperate for additional school funding, all during a time when my district and other growing areas can't afford to continue the raising of their property taxes. And I just want to point out, I have the East Stroudsburg School District there. The growth is the blue, and the red is the funding. That blue area there is the area that wasn't addressed, and how it gets addressed locally by escalating school property taxes. We could have done this with many of the school districts that are represented here by my colleagues. With about 140 Pennsylvanians reps of the 203 House members representing slow or declining population that benefit from the formula, our counties have no chance of convincing the General Assembly to change this formula. Let's take a look, and I just pointed out these Stroudsburg school districts, approximately $65 million in state basic aid, education aid since the 1991-1992 school year because of a hold harmless provision. Under the lawsuit, my colleagues and I urged the courts to not only overturn that formula, but to also reimburse local school districts for lost revenue under that 1991 formula. This could amount to millions and millions of dollars per district. East Stroudsburg business manager, and I just showed Patricia Bader, compiled a statistical comparison that ranked East Stroudsburg dead last among 500 school districts in average per pupil attendance poverty aid, just behind Pocono Mountain at $1,465. Bader told me that when you just look at what other school districts get compared to what East Stroudsburg gets, it's startling. Because we're faced with yet another tough budget year, now is the time to further cut education costs. If lawmakers in other parts of the state can file and win lawsuits regarding the state's redistricting map, which has never happened before, there is no reasons why we shouldn't be able to sue the state based on an unconstitutional education funding formula. A victorious outcome for our lawsuit against the state also increases the chance of crucial property tax bills such as 176, Representative Grove's legislation, Representative Cott's legislation, and any other school property tax reform measure. If the hold harmless provision is repealed by the court, slower growing districts that have been gaining on the current education funding system will lose those dollars they've been receiving based off of 2-decade-old census numbers. While the funding to the enrollment gap has begun to close over recent years for East Stroudsburg, it's vital to overturn the education funding formula to ensure that school districts and many others like it don't have to worry about huge funding losses as they're experienced for several years. Currently, school districts reporting on student attendance and enrollment status is delayed and required in numerous and duplicative systems. And I commend the governor's office because they're looking at real-time ADMs. But even if we're able and successful to do that, we need to pass this on the House floor, which means there's about 140 reps out there that will find it a problem for themselves to vote for something that's going to take monies away from their schools. This needs to be addressed, folks. We continue to raise taxes in our counties, and the state's not paying their fair share. My county alone, and I'll just talk about my county, but I can tell you the county's represented behind me, and some of the representatives are going to speak to that as well. In 2009, the Tax Foundation did a study of 65,000 in counties and 65,000 population and up throughout the country. My county was the worst, the lowest, based off of property taxes and the ability to pay those property taxes. It was census generated 2009 statistics. Today we're probably worse than that in the state. In the country we were 48th. We cannot continue to raise property tax. I have 3,000 homes empty in my district in Monroe County right now. We have I'll say a $250,000 house. I've said this many a times. Today is built 5 years ago. Today is worth about $150,000, and it's got an $11,000 property tax bill on it. $11,000 property taxes. You're really a prisoner in your own home, and this has got to stop. So I'm hoping that starting this lawsuit might just wake up some folks and realize we've got to throw this funding formula out. And if you look at other states that have made significant strides in changing the way they fund public education, it started with a lawsuit. Now I'm going to step aside and have some of my colleagues, and I believe we'll start with Representative Miller.
Hello, Representative Ron Miller, York County. I started this fight in 1991 as a Dallastown School Board member. I have followed through with this fight through my years in the State House, and Representative Scavello has framed the issue very, very well. You cannot outvote 143 people with 60. It is not possible. Over the years, I've had amendments put in budget negotiations in the House to put $150, $200 million extra into growing school districts, only to have that taken out in the Senate in further negotiations. This isn't a battle that has not been won because of a lack of effort by people from the growing areas of the state. It's just the fact that it's very hard to convince people to take money from their constituents to help ours. So I congratulate Mario on leading this charge. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. If we can get the courts involved and force an equalization of the funding, it'll help our schools, help our taxpayers, and it'll even follow through to the mental health funding across the state. It'll follow through to the seniors funding across the state, because in '91 we quit counting people in all programs. It's time to count people again and fund these programs appropriately. Thank you.
Representative Stan Saylor from York County as well. One of the things, and Mario's laid this really out perfectly, and I suggest to you in the media, what you need to look at is go look at properties in Philadelphia, the city, pick out a $250,000 property, see what they're paying in property taxes, and look what they're paying in York County or Monroe County, and the difference in it. When you talk about equality of funding education, this state just is not going to, through the legislative process, unless it's forced by the courts, to change the funding formula. Mario has made it very clear, when you have 140 members of the House who benefit from a formula that punishes children in other counties, it's just not going to change. People aren't willing to vote to give up money that goes and flows into their school districts that keep their property taxes very, very low. When you can take a house from York County that's paying $6,000 in property taxes a year and go look at another county that has lost students and they're paying $1,000 a year in property taxes, who, in his right mind, in all honesty, is truthfully going to vote against their own districts? So the only way to fix this unconstitutional formula is truly for the courts to come down and say, as they have in other states, this isn't the first time these kind of things have happened. Other Supreme Courts in other states have ruled that the legislature has to change the funding. We need our Pennsylvania Supreme Court to stand up for all the citizens of this Commonwealth to make sure that every child has the same amount of money flowing into their districts as they do in Philadelphia and other school districts. It is time for our Supreme Court to stand up for the children of this Commonwealth and make sure they get the dollars they need. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown. I represent the 189th District, which includes also sharing with Representative Scavello Monroe County and Pike counties, two counties that have had tremendous growth over the last 20 years. Growth in a district, as many of the members have said, can bring many positive impacts, but it can also bring many challenges. So as the population of an area grows, one of the challenges is the need for additional schools, for additional programs, and for additional teachers. I stand here today because my district has had those needs, and we have fulfilled them. But the question is, did the state help to fund those educational growth needs using a fair and equitable formula towards several schools in my district and many others across the state? You would think that common sense and logic would dictate that state funding formulas are based upon the needs of a school district and best meeting the needs of the students, but it's not always the case. Way back, as Representative Scavello said, in 1991, a provision placed in the law locked the education funding formula, stating that a school district cannot receive any less state funding than it did the prior year. It was a provision to protect certain school districts, but the strong unintended consequence was that it hurt and it ignored others, such as those in my district. If you really think about the provision in the law, does it make sense? How can the state fairly say that the needs of a school district cannot change over time? Common sense tells us that wouldn't work, it wouldn't be efficient, and definitely it wouldn't be fair. So with the population growth in many parts of my district, as well as many representatives behind me, the level of state funding and aid was not based on the number of students, and our district and taxpayers were left to fill the financial hole. This is only one piece, but a very strong foundational piece of the puzzle that has contributed to excessive and unmanageable school property taxes for my constituents. It is time that this outdated, unadjusted formula is challenged. I will not accept that it can't be changed, and it is an impossible need fixed. Enough is enough. Myself and Representative Scavello and many other legislators who are now joining our leading efforts feel strongly that the Commonwealth Court needs to fully review the school funding formula, and specifically the hold harmless 1991 provision in the law, and decide whether or not it is fair and it's constitutional. We need this formula changed so that all school districts are funded fairly. If the court finds our needs have not been met fairly, we request a plan of reallocation over the next few years of funds that have been lost in previous years to help repair the financial damage to our local districts and our taxpayers. I want to express my sincere appreciation to a number of my colleagues who are standing behind me, all from other areas of the state that have grown as well. These districts have experienced major population growth and have suffered as a result of this locked formula and the hold harmless provision. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for being here today. Doyle Heffley, I represent Carbon County, the 122nd District, and I want to thank my colleagues for joining us here today, as well as Representative Scavello from Monroe County at bringing this issue to the forefront. I agree that it's not fair. The costing out study and the funding formula as it exists right now punishes taxpayers, property taxpayers in local and growing school districts. I've heard it throughout my district, from senior citizens, from working families, businesses alike, that their property tax burden is driving them out of the area. As Mario highlighted earlier, in Monroe County as well as in Carbon County, realtors are having problems selling homes because of the property tax burden. I think this is the first step in a lot of steps that need to be taken to comprehensively reform the property tax structure and the funding formula for schools. I commend Mario for bringing this to the forefront, and I look forward to working on solutions to solve it moving forward. Thank you.
Will Tallman, York and Adams counties, and I've worked for the past 3.5 years with Representative Miller on trying to figure out the school funding formula and the politics involved. 2008, we had a costing out study which said that education funding should be fair, equitable, and adequate. I'm going to give you a real brief course in logic. The school funding formula is not fair, the school funding formula is not equitable, therefore it is not adequate. Thank you.
Mario, I just want to thank you for your continued leadership on this topic. You've been doing this for a very, very long time. You're a hard-nosed fighter on behalf of your constituents, and on behalf of my constituents, I want to thank you for developing this lawsuit to bring some equity to our funding formula. This is just not about education. This is just not about students. This is not about actually telling my students that they are not second-class students, that they are important, that their funding will match those of other areas to make sure we have equitability. This is about my seniors who are on waiting lists because our funding formula for seniors does the same thing. We have waiting list upon waiting list because we're not getting our fair share of funding for our seniors. For our intellectually disabled individuals, we're not getting our fair share for the most needy because of our growth. It is unfair, it's unconstitutional. We need to ensure that we do everything we can to protect our hardworking taxpayers and the individuals who actually need funding in our area. So I applaud my colleagues for their leadership. Again, Mario, thank you so much for bringing this to the forefront, and we will continue to do everything we can to ensure we have fair and equitable funding formulas in this state. Regardless of the outcome, we will continue fighting for this topic, and I appreciate, again, Mario's and my colleagues' leadership on this topic. Thank you.
I just want to invite a gentleman, Arnold Hillman, who is with the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools. And this gentleman knows about funding formulas and can really speak to this. So Arnold, if you might come up for a moment.
How you doing? I'm Arnold Hillman from the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools. And I wish I could be as brief as Representative Tallman. Not only the three things that he said, the whole thing is just not logical. And by the way, there is no funding formula. This is deja vu, as Yogi Berra would say, all over again. PARS sued the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania from 1991 to 1999 on exactly the same thing. And we were told by the Supreme Court that it's none of their business, which is very, very unfortunate. And so a good friend of mine, Jim Rhodes, God rest his soul, decided to do exactly what you're asking. He wiped out the formula and created a formula based on amount of money, number of kids, and aid ratio, and also personal income. And that accumulated 21 state senators, 12 Republicans and 9 Democrats. The formula is not only inequitable, it has been tampered with, not since the 1990s, but since the 1980s, by every administration and every legislature, for whatever reasons they were. In 1974, the state funded schools at 54%. There was something in the school code that suggested that 50% local and 50% from the state. It is now down to 34%, and that's billions and billions of dollars. I applaud what Representative Scavello and the rest of you are doing, and any help that I can be to you from my horrible experiences for 10 years, and I still owe Pepper Hamilton and Sheets $1 million. Thank you very, very much.
We're suing on the constitutionality of the law that distributes the funding. And to freeze everything in a moment in time, why take a census every 10 years? And frankly, it's a new day in the court system. They've never overturned the map before, and they have. So, you know, and again, we're not suing for the funding. We're suing on the distribution of that law, that hold harmless provision. And just like my colleagues have stated earlier, it's not just about education dollars, it's about every dollar that goes into the counties for seniors, MHMR, all the various programs. We're still at that number back in 1990. And, just to talk about something briefly, in the 90s, if you were losing population, you were still getting a 2% increase in funding. If the state put 2% in, everybody got 2%, regardless if you grew, stayed the same, or lost population. And it really put a big separation just to show you what happened there throughout those years for that school district. And I'm telling you, any one of these school districts here would have that separation of blue and red. When you have school districts out there getting $11,000 per student and some school districts out there getting $1,500 and $1,600 per student, something is wrong. And I don't want to hear the story that we have a richer area, because half of my student population of Pocono Mountain School District qualifies for free reduced lunch. It's not the case.
Many school districts right now receive money because of the hold harmless provision.
I would say you have about 140 members that would be negatively affected, so it's a substantial amount. The school districts that have grown a little bit, I'll give you an example. In Berks County would have a huge issue, and that's why you see that 1776 bill coming out of that area. York County, the suburbs of Philly, the migration from Philadelphia. Northampton is starting to experience it now with the connector of 33 to 78. Carbon County, Wayne, Pike, Monroe. It's only a certain pockets in the state. The rest of the state's either been flat or losing population. So those growing areas are the ones that have been negatively affected.
Can I add one thing? One of the things that, when this isn't a problem that's just cropped up, this is something we've been talking about a long time. Right now we have, a shortage of money in this Commonwealth and things are tight. But when we had the money, we asked for this formula to be changed, and it really wouldn't, the school districts that were in this situation are gaining right now, wouldn't have lost anything. We could have fixed the funding formula with additional dollars put into it to fix these growing school districts, and it fell on deaf ears. So at some point you say, it's not that we're trying to hurt anybody's other school district or raise anybody else's taxes. We're saying if when you had the dollars you didn't fix it, we asked you to do it then. It's now time that somebody has to act. Because it doesn't matter whether we have the money or we don't have the money. Nobody has been willing to come forward until Mario did to say, okay, we're going to do something about this because we're tired of waiting. We're tired of promises. Governor Rendell promised it. Every governor has promised to fix this formula when they were out campaigning. And when it came time and they were in office, they didn't fix it.
I've been told by my colleagues about 3/4 of the school districts would be negatively affected.
Mario,
yes.
Three sort of related questions. One, do you anticipate filing the suit? Who's footing the bill for this? And
I am. If some of the gentlemen want to throw some extra dollars at it, but I'm going to personally fund it. It means that much to my area.
And so you're getting outside counsel for this?
I have an outside counsel, yes.
Who's the firm?
Excuse me?
Who's the firm?
I'm sorry to hear you.
What's the firm? What law firm?
It's an individual. He's a constitutional attorney, and he asked me not to mention his name because he doesn't want to have phone calls. He's researching the law, and he's going to put all this in. So he'd rather not until he files the suit. Wants to stay anonymous.
When do you anticipate filing the suit?
We would have been a lot sooner, but now I have a tremendous amount of members coming into the suit, so I need background information on their school districts. There's going to be a taxpayer from every school district, not just a representative. So in order to compile all that, I'm looking at maybe 90 days, 120 days, because we need the school district information, we need the taxpayer, so it's going to take a little bit of a time, but we're putting it together.
Spoke of part of the damages, I guess is the word for it, is to reallocate the money that these school districts didn't receive. Who pays for that?
We've been paying it all along for all these years, and it's been my taxpayers and their taxpayers out of their property taxes. And not only that, but our seniors have been hurting. We did a study back in 2006, I believe, what the effect of the hold harmless was on all of the services, and I believe Representative Petrie did the study. And it shows the disparity between some of these counties on every issue, not just property tax, school funding, but on all funding across the board. And I'd recommend, if you want, I'll get you that study. And that's just 5 years dated, and things haven't changed since then. They've only gotten worse.
Like, does that mean that, like, there would have to be, you'd have to pull some money out of some other fund in the budget and plunk it over to...
Well, either do that, or with new money coming into the formula, when things start to change, address the growing school districts. You know, you don't have to, if you put $100 million in, a chunk of that should go to the growing school district, and over a period of time, I'm sure that the members here wouldn't mind something like that. But we need to be made whole. We can't continue to raise... In Pocono Mountain School District last year raised taxes per house between $400 and $500. You know, $400 and $500. You know, we just can't continue to do things like this. And the answer is, they need to be made whole in some way, and if it can't happen all at once, let's do it over a period of time with new money. And I believe that the governor is really looking at this real-time ADMs, which is what we really need to do. The Secretary of Education mentioned it in the Appropriations Committee. However, putting that bill on the floor, will we have the votes for it? Because of the situation that we stated earlier. You got about 140 members that would be negatively affected. So we need this is something that needs to happen. Do I want to spend the money to do this? No, I really don't. But I have to tell you, at some point you got to say, you know, I passed the property tax bill in the House 5 years ago, raising the sales tax by 0.5%, taxing some other items, raising the PIT. It was about a 45% reduction on residential. It went to the Senate, because it's not an issue there. Just to give you an idea of Monroe, if you took, we have 6 senators that cover Monroe and 4 reps. If you added my property tax bill, Representative Brown's and Representative Pfeiffer's, we're more than the other 9. Why? Because the other 9, most of them aren't growing. They're in areas that haven't grown.
You've been watching a press conference announcing a lawsuit to declare the school funding formula unconstitutional in order to help restore fairness to growing school districts. I'm State Representative Rosemary Brown. That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have any questions about this effort, please feel free to contact me at my local office or through my website. That information will be shown in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for Legislative Report.